Happy New Year and welcome to the Perrysburg Podcast, episode 76. I'm your host and Perrysburg resident, Kim Newlove. This is an informational podcast for prospective, new, and current Perrysburg, Ohio residents. We talk about what's in Perrysburg and why people like to live here. Our website is perrysburgpodcast.com. Today's episode is about what's coming up on this podcast in 2025. You could say that this episode will let you in on what's on my vision board for this podcast in 2025. Now, if the term vision board is new to you, let me tell you what vision board means to me. My vision board for this podcast is a piece of paper. It's an 8.5 by 11-inch piece of white computer paper with pictures representing the content that I wish to publish in 2025. It's a visual aid, and it keeps me on track. Whenever I see a shiny object or breaking news, I think, hey, let's stay on track. Some people use vision boards as a motivational tool. I use vision boards to keep me focused. I'm already motivated. I've been podcasting since 2019. I've got 2 podcasts. I know how to produce content on a weekly basis without fail. Been doing it for 5 years. Focus, on the other hand, is what I need. There are shiny objects, so to speak, in the news all the time. I need to stay focused so I don't chase that breaking news. This is an informational podcast, not a breaking news podcast. If you subscribe to the newsletter for this podcast, by the way, you will see my 2025 vision board for the Perrysburg Podcast in today's newsletter. Enjoy. When I started the Perrysburg Podcast in July of 2023, I only planned to run it for 3 years. After that, we'll see what happens. This is a service project or a hobby podcast. Nobody's paying me to do this. This is not sponsored in any way. As I published this episode in January 2025, the very first half of this podcast is done. 2025 is the last full year of this podcast. I will run 1 episode per week until the first week of July in 2026. July 2026 is when this podcast ends, unless something else motivates me to keep going. With every month that passes, we are counting down to the finale. As I was brainstorming what to put on the show in 2025, I generated more than 60 ideas. 3 episodes for 2025 are already spoken for, but most of this episode covers the other 49. But first, which 3 episodes are already planned? Today's episode counts as number 1. Number 2 is the final episode in the Food and Drink series on January 31st. We'll be covering miscellaneous food and drink topics like Pampered Chef, Tastefully Simple, catering businesses, and anything else that I can think of that didn't fit into the first 6 episodes. Those first 6 episodes were about ice cream, coffee, restaurants, butcher shops, bakeries, and bars. Feel free to email any suggestions for that last episode in the Food and Drink series to me at kim@perrysburgpodcast.com. And the 3rd episode that's already scheduled is the 2nd podcast anniversary episode for the Perrysburg Podcast, which is scheduled for July 4th, 2025. That leaves me with 49 weeks of content to fill. 49 weeks. I need 49 episodes. It's a good thing I've got more than 60 ideas for content because it should then be fairly easy to fill up my 2025 production schedule. And I'll have some ideas left over for 2026. My episode ideas, those 60 ideas, fit into 12 categories. I'll list the 12 categories first, then I'll share some examples from each category. Number 1, faith community leader interviews. Number 2, attractions in Perrysburg. Number 3, Perrysburg resident interviews. Number 4, sources of information. 5, parks. 6, a medical series. 7, sports. 8, scouts. 9, school-related. Number 10, City of Perrysburg topics. Number 11, police and fire topics. And number 12 is miscellaneous topics. That's it for my list of 12 categories for my 2025 vision board. Next, I'll share a few examples from each of those categories. Starting with the first category, faith community leader interviews. I would like to interview the pastor or faith community leader from the following 8 places. Number 1, St. Timothy's Episcopal Church. Number 2, the Perrysburg Alliance Church. Number 3, First United Methodist Church. Number 4, St. Rose Catholic Church. Number 5, Cedar Creek Church. Number 6, the Presbyterian Church at the corner of Elm and 2nd. Number 7, the Mosque. Number 8, synagogues. We don't have any in Perrysburg, so I'd like to get in touch with someone in Sylvania to represent the synagogues. And that ends the list. I do have some on my radar for 2026. They are Stonebridge Church and the Christian Science Reading Room. The second category on my vision board is what I call attractions in Perrysburg. I'd like to interview someone from the 577 Foundation, Fort Meigs YMCA, and the Fort Meigs Historical Site. And just in case you're wondering, the Spafford House Museum is on the list for 2026. Resident interviews is the third category. I would like to interview more Perrysburg residents. I did it in 2024. I'd like to keep doing that. The number one interview that I would love to record is with Joe Stockner interviewing Doug Pratt. That's right. I would like somebody to do my job for me. I'm friends with Joe, and I know him from the YMCA. Joe is a retired veteran. He's an educator and a volunteer. He's friends with Doug Pratt, a retired farmer who lives on Hall Prairie Road. Doug is planning to donate his farmland, his farm on Hall Prairie Road, to the Wood County Park District, according to the website bgindependentmedia.org. When I read about this, I was fascinated. I want to learn more about this gift of farmland. Another resident interview that I'd like to record is with Justin and Krista Marchand. I didn't get a chance to interview them in the summer, and I would like to interview them in 2025. They are a Perrysburg area couple and parents to 5 daughters, ranging from preschool to teen. They go to my church, and I think that their story about what brought them to Perrysburg and why they like living here would be a perfect fit for the show. I'd also like to interview these 5 people. They are, number 1, Mrs. Mosier, who runs Nana's Honey on Hall Prairie Road. Number 2, my friend Lionel Brock and/or his wife Nikki. They just moved back to Perrysburg, and Lionel and I went to college together, and their daughter Leah was my flower girl in 2001. I think that would be really fun to interview my friend. Number 3 is Paul Smithers, known as Pickleball Paul. Pickleball Paul, what a great nickname. Number 4, Gary Franks. He's a local author. Local author to me, I'm sure he's so much more to the Perrysburg community. And number 5 is Richard Baranowski, the Way Library local history librarian. I'd love to talk to him about what brought him to Perrysburg and why he likes living here. I believe he was born and raised here, but I would like to get his story. My goal for 2025 is to schedule at least 6 resident interviews. Let's move on to the fourth category on my list. It is sources of information. These are all follow-up episodes, follow-up from episode 6 of the Perrysburg Podcast. In that episode, I mentioned several sources of information about Perrysburg that I recommend, and I would like to take a deeper dive into the Buzz Book, the Perrysburg Messenger Journal newspaper, which I lovingly call the PMJ, and the Buy Nothing Facebook page. That leaves Historic Perrysburg Inc. on the list for 2026. Actually, I might combine that episode about Historic Perrysburg Inc. with the Spafford House Museum episode. I believe they're connected, so that should be coming up in 2026. Moving on to the fifth category, parks. I've already covered more than half of the parks in Perrysburg in 2023 and 2024. The list of parks is in episode 7, and you can kind of see all of the different episodes about parks sprinkled in over the past year and a half. What haven't I covered yet, you're probably wondering? I haven't covered these 5. Number 1, Rivercrest Park. Number 2, Bicentennial Park. Number 3, Municipal Park. Number 4, Orleans Park. And number 5, Three Meadows Park. Now, I would like to do 3 other episodes about parks, but I don't know if I'll get time. If I get time, I would like to redo the Woodlands Park episode because they have updated the sculpture walk. Then I may get around to another interview with the Wood County Park District on a topic of their choosing. Or I may suggest that we talk about the Pratt Farm donation because, again, I'm very interested in learning more about that. And lastly, I'd love to do an episode about the Toledo Metro Parks. I love the Toledo Metro Parks. Wildwood and Oak openings are my favorite. Many Perrysburg residents love the Toledo Metro Parks, so among all of the other Toledo area attractions, I would like to do an episode about the Toledo Metro Parks. There's so many things that Perrysburg residents enjoy in Toledo, and I really need to dedicate an episode to that. The Toledo Zoo, Toledo Walleye, Toledo Mud Hens, and so much more. That does it for the parks. I love the parks. Next up is category number 6, which is a medical series. If you're new to the show, it might be helpful for you to know right now that I am an Ohio pharmacist. I went to the University of Toledo College of Pharmacy, and I got my BS Pharm in 2001. I have experience in hospital, retail, compounding, and behavioral health. Since I am a medical person, I'm including some medical topics in my 2025 production schedule. 3 out of 4 of these will be solo shows. Part 1 of the 4 will be the only interview. I'll be talking to Shannon Kazel at Prime IV Hydration and Wellness this month. Part 2 of this series will be about Perrysburg area urgent cares, primary care providers, concierge doctors, hospitals, dentists, eye doctors, and all the other providers for humans. And then part 3 will be about the various animal topics: veterinarians, emergency pet care, groomers, doggy daycare, and anything else that I can think of. And the 4th and final part of this series will be about pharmacies. Pharmacies, of course, because I'm a pharmacist. Perrysburg is home to several chain and independent pharmacies, including one of the very best compounding pharmacies in the whole entire state, Booterer's Compounding Pharmacy. Now, you may not know this, but October is American Pharmacists Month, so I will probably run that episode in October. Now, in 2026, this is a long ways off, okay, more than a year away, but what I'd like to do is run a series on autism-related resources in and around Perrysburg, and that will be in April of 2026, in honor of Autism Awareness and Acceptance Month. I have an adult son with autism, and I'd like to do something to give back to Perrysburg. We'll probably talk about Wood Lane, Perrysburg schools, and where to find speech, OT, and early intervention services. That's it for medical stuff. Now on to the 7th category, which is sports in Perrysburg. There's a lot of sports activity in Perrysburg, so I will have to think of a good way to cover the topic. There's a lot to cover. We covered fishing and kayaking in 2024. It wasn't nearly enough sports. So in 2025, I've got a lot to do. I'd like to interview Mario or Buckshot from Mommy Tackle in February before they get super busy with the spring walleye run. Fishing is important to Northwest Ohio, so I want to put them right away in February. I hope to cover gyms as a topic in general. If I get an interview with Pickleball Paul, that should cover pickleball. Pickleball is very popular now in Perrysburg. If not, I'll find another way to cover the topic. I'd like to cover school sports and club sports for youth. This will cover baseball, softball, volleyball, basketball, football, rugby, curling, bowling, soccer, gymnastics, twirling, dance, and anything else that I can think of that's a sport. I think there's something called esports at the high school now, which is multiplayer competitive video games, I think. Something like that. Anyways, I've got a lot to learn about sports in Perrysburg. It's a huge topic, and I've got my work cut out for me in 2025. I may also get a local deer hunter on the show to talk about bow season right around the end of September. Like I said, lots to cover on the topic of sports, youth and adult. Let's go with Scouts next. That is a very short topic. I'll be reaching out to the Girl Scouts of Western Ohio and the Boy Scouts Erie Shores Council for more information about scouting in Perrysburg. Next up is category number 9, school-related topics. The only 2 school-related examples on my list are preschools and graduation party advice. I've got the 2 ends of the spectrum covered here. I'd like to talk about which preschools are in Perrysburg, mostly because when I was shopping for a preschool for my son Derek, the library had a really nice list, if I remember right. And it was really helpful for me to take that list and then ask all the other moms, what do you know about this one or that one? And it helped me decide. So I'd like to return the favor and at least talk about them on the podcast. And the other topic on my list is how to celebrate the end of your child's K through 12 career. I have 2 sons myself, and one of them is completing high school in May of 2025. The timing's right, so I'm going to do a grad party episode. A grad party episode in April 2025, right before Perrysburg High School's graduation, which is the first part of May. And that does it for school-related episodes in 2025. Just 3 categories left here. Category number 10 is City of Perrysburg topics. The 4 examples I have on my radar are taxes, very exciting, I know, the summer rec program, Perrysburg Transit, and the Perrysburg Senior Center. Category number 11 on my list is police and fire department topics. Some examples for this category include Fire Prevention Week in October, the Knox Box program, and the Babysitter Training program that I believe is the fire department's CPR and first aid program. That's what I believe that is. I get to learn more. I love how this podcast gets me to pause and look into things that I've seen on a sign passing by but never really looked into. As for the police, city and or township, I'm open to topics of their choosing. I was thinking maybe myths and misconceptions about the DORA would be good, but again, I'm open to suggestions. In the past, I've interviewed an officer about porch pirates and an officer about getting home safely, drinking and driving. That was just last week. That does it for police and fire topics. The 12th and final category of episodes on my radar for 2025 is miscellaneous topics. It's the miscellaneous topics category. On my vision board, I have a kitchen sink because literally this is everything that did not fit into another category. I have more than a dozen examples. I'll just read the first 10 to you, and then we'll wrap this episode up. Number 1 is Gathering Volumes Bookstore, our local independent bookstore. Number 2 is Small Business Saturday, which encourages shoppers to shop local on November 29th, 2025. Number 3 is the Adamus Board, the Alcohol, Drug Addiction, and Mental Health Services Board that's in Bowling Green, Ohio. As taxpayers, we fund them. We see their name come up on levies, on our ballots all the time. What do they do for Perrysburg residents? Find out during that episode. Number 4, I've got Way Public Library. Again, I would like to host them for any topic or program that they'd like. Number 5, I'd like to interview my friend Mona Kamari. She's a realtor that sells real estate here in Perrysburg. Number 6, my husband came up with this one. It's internet providers. My husband, I love him. He's a nerd. He's an engineer, and he thought it would be good to do an episode on internet providers. Not sure how high of a priority that is. Thanks, honey, if you're listening. Anyways, I'll move on to number 7. ODOT, the Ohio Department of Transportation. What road projects do they have coming up in spring and summer, right when we're all trying to travel? I'd like to talk to ODOT. Number 8, best places to meet Santa in and around Perrysburg. I know we've got Bass Pro and Levis Commons. What else is there? Number 9 is summer jobs. I have seen this question come up on the Perrysburg, Ohio Facebook group many times. People ask, what's a good summer job for a teenager? What's a good first job for a 14-year-old, 15-year-old, 16-year-old, etc.? So we'll be talking about that. And the 10th one on my list, this will be the last one that I list, even though I have more, is volunteer opportunities. So maybe you have a teenager who's looking for volunteer hours for any number of reasons, for, confirmation class for church, or maybe they got in trouble with the law and they've got some volunteer hours they have to complete, or maybe they've got a strong calling in their heart to help other people. Volunteer opportunities in Perrysburg are plentiful. I'll be talking about them in that episode. And that does it for the examples in my miscellaneous topics category, which is the 12th and final category on my vision board for 2025. Now that the word is out and the vision board is complete and hung up on my wall, I need to plug episodes into my production schedule. I have all 52 Fridays in 2025 written out on a piece of notebook paper. I did this type of planning in 2024 and it worked so well. It helps me keep on track. It helps me invite people in plenty of time to have an interview and edit it and get it out to you. So we're doing it again in 2025. In 2025, I plan to alternate solo shows and interview shows for the most part. I have found that since I have another podcast, it works really well if I don't do 2 interviews in the same week. It can be a lot of work. So I'm going to be intentional about my solo shows and interview shows. Thank you so much for listening to me talk about my vision for the Perrysburg Podcast in 2025. We talked about faith community leader interviews, attractions, resident interviews, sources of information, parks, the medical series that I'm planning, sports, scouts, school-related topics, City of Perrysburg topics, police and fire topics, and miscellaneous topics. We covered a lot. There's a lot coming up here in 2025, and hey, if you can help me in any way to get the content that I need for all these great upcoming episodes, please reach out via email. My email address is kim@perrysburgpodcast.com. I'll put that email address in the show notes on perrysburgpodcast.com just in case you can't write it down right now because you're driving or walking your dog. I'd love to hear from you. Speaking of the show notes, you will find links to many of the people, places, and things mentioned in this episode in those show notes, including that article about Doug Pratt's farm. Maybe you haven't heard of the donation yet and you'd like to learn more about it too. I'll also have a link to sign up for the Perrysburg Podcast newsletter in the show notes on perrysburgpodcast.com. Go ahead and subscribe to or follow the Perrysburg Podcast on your favorite podcast player and YouTube to get each new episode in 2025 right when it comes out. Share this episode with anyone new to town or anyone you know who might like to learn about what's in Perrysburg and why people like to live here. Thanks for listening today. Happy New Year, and I'll talk to you next Friday.